I'm Helen Jackard. I'm the project manager for the Veterans for Peace Golden Rule Project, the anti-nuclear peace boat.
Didn't know when we set sail in 58 we'd all end up.
So thank you for coming. This is being recorded so that we can share it with other people who couldn't be here tonight, and I'm really happy about that. Instead of showing the movie, which is Making Waves, Rebirth of the Golden Rule, that tells the story of the Golden Rule, I'm going to be very brief because most of the people that are here have seen it, and anyone that's curious about seeing a good documentary about the Golden Rule can go to our website, vfpgoldenrule.org, and watch either a 10-minute or a 25-minute version of the movie. The Golden Rule was used at a time when the United States was testing nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands, in the Bikini and the Eniwetok atolls. The U.S. detonated 67 nuclear bombs there, and the people were, and that was releasing radiation into the atmosphere, which was blowing all over the planet, and people were trying to get this stopped. After trying protests, writing letters to the editor, demonstrating in the streets, talking to their congressmen at the time, and the president, they decided that they needed to escalate their tactics, and a group of Quakers bought a boat, the Golden Rule, and attempted her to sail right into the nuclear testing zone in the Marshall Islands. Well, the Coast Guard brought it back, and they were put under arrest, and this sparked a big anti-nuclear movement at the time, and ultimately helped build up such a big anti-nuclear movement that it helped to give President Kennedy the cover he needed to sign the Limited Test Ban Treaty of 1963. Using this tactic also sparked the founding of Greenpeace, and they also were trying to stop nuclear testing.
Other side. Oh, never mind. That's good. That's a better light. Gives you more color.
Thank you.
Okay.
There was a second boat that sailed out of Hawaii and took the baton literally from the people of the Golden Rule, and they did sail into the nuclear testing zone. It was captained by Dr. Earl Reynolds, who had been studying the effects of radiation on children in Hiroshima, so he knew very well what radiation could do, and they decided that they would try to, as a family, and with a Japanese crew member, to stop the testing. And they made it to the Marshall Islands. They too were arrested and forced back to Honolulu for trial. After this action in 1958, Bigelow sold the Golden Rule and went into private hands, and nobody heard anything about her until she sank in far northern California in a gale. Then, Veterans for Peace and Quakers and Wooden Boat Letters got together and decided to rebuild her. Now, Veterans for Peace is interesting in this story. One thing is that Captain Bigelow, who was the first captain of the Golden Rule, who was a commander in the Navy, and he had quit his commission out of protest of the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that he was a veteran for peace. So Veterans for Peace and others restored the Golden Rule from 2010 to 2015. She's a very lucky boat. Most rebuilds are never completed. And in 2015, we launched her into the Pacific Ocean and started sailing up and down the West Coast, giving talks like we're giving today about nuclear issues and stopping the possibility of nuclear war. We've been up and down the West Coast several times, and then when Chairman Kim and President Trump were threatening each other with nuclear annihilation, we we decided to take the Golden Rule back into the Pacific to see what we could do to try to stop the possibility of that nuclear war. And once again, the Golden Rule made it as far as Hawaii. We spent 2 years traveling all around the Hawaiian Islands, giving talks, and listening, and finding out about the effects of militarism on island peoples in the Pacific, what it's done to their environment, what it's done to their culture. So this listening became a very important part of what we do. And we listened. We couldn't go to where we wanted to go. We were trying to go to first Hawaii and then the Marshall Islands, where the Golden Rule has probably never been, and then on to Guam, Okinawa, and Japan in time for the 75th anniversary of the dropping of the bombs. And we were all ready to go, but it was March 2020, and we were stopped by COVID. But we did learn a lot, and we did try to give voice to the people that we were trying to see, the Japanese and the Okinawans and the Chamorros of Guam and the people of Hawaii and the Marshall Islands. And it's really great that the Marshall Islands now know that we exist, and that the Golden Rule was trying, the crew was trying to get to them to see if they could stop the nuclear testing. So we brought the Golden Rule back. After 2 years in Hawaii, we brought her back to California. We thought about, well, now what? And the people who rebuilt the boat just had told us that they had this dream, this vision, of the Golden Rule sailing all of the navigable waters of the United States. So we started doing some research, and there's this pathway around the United States on the eastern half of the United States called the Great Loop. Maybe you could advance the slideshow a little bit. Okay, so before we talk about the Great Loop, we could talk about Veterans for Peace is an organization of around 300, mostly military veterans and some of their supporters. I'm what they call an associate member.
3,000.
Pardon me?
3,000.
3,000, sorry. And there's over 100 chapters, most of them in the United States, but we have several international chapters as well. And one of the goals of Veterans for Peace is to end the arms race and to reduce and ultimately eliminate nuclear weapons. The Golden Rule is the embodiment of that. It's the way that Veterans for Peace can work towards nuclear disarmament. Okay. So here's where we went from in 2016, 15, well, as I said, we sailed up and down the West Coast. Go ahead. And all around the Hawaiian Islands. This is the Golden Rule in front of Diamond Head in Honolulu in 1958 and in 2019. Okay. So, here we are thinking about what are the navigable waters of the United States and how are we going to get there. And as we started talking about going around the Great Loop, which is you start anywhere except Minneapolis, and you go around this big circle around the country. There's a lot of different ways you can get into the Great Lakes, and there's 2 different ways you can get down from St. Louis down to the Gulf of Mexico. But you don't start in Minneapolis. Well, we have a very strong chapter of the Minneapolis Veterans for Peace that lobbied hard for us to start there. And we didn't really have any reason why not, except that it was not normally done. So we took the Golden Rule and put her on a truck, and we took her to near Minneapolis, where we put the masts back on and the sails back on, and started doing presentations. And so here we are. We made it. We were going to go down the entire Mississippi River this year, but we couldn't because of the drought in the Midwest. And so there's not enough water for us to get out of the channel and out of the way of the big barge tows. So instead, we veered off and we took the Ohio, Tennessee, and Tombigbee rivers down to the Gulf of Mexico. And we haven't been here all that long, so this is our first stop in Florida. Where we're going from here is we're going to go down to the tip of Florida. We thought we were going to head straight for Miami after that, but Veterans for Peace just approved a trip to Cuba. So we're going to go to Cuba before we go up to Miami, and then up the East Coast. We're going far up into Maine so we can go do a little protesting at Bath Iron Works up there, where they make the nuclear-armed submarines, I guess. And then come back to New York, and we'll go up the Hudson River and through the Erie Canal system, and come out the Oswego Canal into Lake Ontario, and then we'll go around the Great Lakes and then come back down the center of the country. It's possible that a year from now we'll be able to go down the lower Mississippi, but we won't know that until closer to the time of when this is happening. So that's the Great Loop and what we're working on right now. Go ahead. We'll flash through these fairly quickly, but these are some of the things that we do. We protest against Fleet Week, which is where the military brings their big war machines into people's cities. We were up in Bangor, Washington, at the nuclear submarine base there. They have a lot of nuclear weapons stockpiled there, and it's the home port of, I think, 8 or 12 nuclear-armed submarines. And we, of course, give presentations. We take people sailing and do boat tours. And sometimes people can go for a sail with us from one town to another. And we had a peace action sailing camp with a group of nonviolence trainers. We supported the Indigenous Canoe Journey in Washington State, where they had people gathering from all over and converging ultimately on Olympia, Washington at the south end of Puget Sound. That picture of that boat up in the upper left is the boat that we supported, and this boat had not been in existence for over 200 years, but Elle Frank decided to do a lot of library research and learn how these were made, and she got herself and some of her tribal members and others together and made one of these. Funny thing about this boat is it has always had 4 paddlers and a bailer that leaks. Okay. When we were in Honolulu, and again just recently, we were, part of our mission is to support the Marshallese who were so damaged by what went on and what the United States did to their islands. And so this was a group of Bikinians, and we gathered there for the anniversary of the Castle Bravo nuclear test, which was the biggest explosion that the United States has ever let off. And it was larger than designed. And that particular morning, although the weatherman said, you shouldn't do this today, they did it anyway, and the wind was blowing over populated areas. So this affected a larger area of the Pacific probably than any other of the nuclear tests. So they come together March 1st, it was 1954, and commemorate this horrible day. Okay. Along the Great Loop, we'll be visiting 100 different ports of call, probably more, almost 11,000 miles, and we'll be giving a lot of presentations and see a lot of people. We've had really great press along the way as well. You can find our schedule on the website, vfpgoldenrule.org. This is a little hard to read, and I'm going to go over a couple of them with you though. Veterans for Peace has a nuclear abolition working group, and one of the things that group has done, in addition to bringing speakers in and recording them, so we have a whole series of wonderful talks that people have given, we also decided to do a nuclear posture review. Every administration since Clinton, has decided that they would do a declaration of this is our stance as a country with respect to nuclear weapons. And it's a very aggressive stance, and so Veterans for Peace decided that they would have their own nuclear posture review. And they would, stand up straight and have a correct posture, which is cooperation instead of global dominance. We also support the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which passed in 2017 by a vote of 122 to 1 in the United Nations General Assembly. And we're very happy that that was largely produced by the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Veterans for Peace and the Golden Rule Project are members of ICAN, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And so we support the treaty, which makes everything about nuclear weapons illegal. To use them, threaten to use them, to possess them, to put them on anybody else's territory, to develop them, to test them, to design them, to finance them, or to help anybody else do any of that. So we also support measures by Back from the Brink, which is in addition to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Take away the President's sole authority to launch a nuclear strike. Get rid of the now $2 trillion nuclear modernization program. Why should we put $2 trillion into a weapon that should never be used? Right? Yeah, we could do a lot more useful things with that money. Take the ICBMs off of hair trigger alert. Those are the weapons that everybody knows where they are. They're a first use weapon because of that. Because if we thought of them as a retaliatory weapon, that wouldn't work very well, because they won't be around to retaliate with. They'll be taken out first. So they're a first strike weapon. I think we need to not only declare a no first use policy in our nuclear posture, but I think we also need to implement that by removing at least the warheads from the missiles so that it gives people more time to think and to not just say, okay, push the button. We also, whenever we're in a town, we'd like to find out, are you part of Mayors for Peace, which is also a nuclear disarmament organization? Probably not here. Is there a resolution that's been passed by your city council in support of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons? Maybe not. It's something you guys could work on in the future. And then something else you could think about is divesting from nuclear weapons. Your pension funds probably have some of the money invested in nuclear weapons production companies. You may also have some of the money invested in banks that finance nuclear weapons companies. So you can put pressure on your city, your county, your state, your pension funds to divest from these companies and put pressure on them. And as they feel more and more pressure, maybe they'll decide that's not such a good business to be in. And I've listed a couple of House resolutions for nuclear disarmament. The one I like the best is the Eleanor Holmes Norton one, where not only are you trying to get rid of nuclear weapons, but you're also converting your energy system over to renewables. You're also retraining your workforce and retooling your factories to make things that are life-affirming and not something that's going to be a weapon of mass production. Destruction. So that's kind of what I would like to say, but I would like to do something a little bit more light with you today. First thing is I'd like to play It's the Ballad of the Phoenix and the Golden Rule, written by Michael Stern in Seattle, specifically for the launch of the Golden Rule in 2015.
Couple videos of him singing on the boat too.
We do, I don't know if they're on my computer.
I'll turn it. I didn't know when we set sail in '58 we'd all end up in jail. And I've been called worse than fool for sailing on the Golden Rule. From San Pedro we headed west on waves of peaceful protest. Trimmed our sails to the wind and prayed the bomb would not be used again. The Golden Rule, words we learned in Sunday school. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Met the Phoenix crew about halfway through. Both our ships moored in Honolulu. We agreed to do our best and try to stop nuclear test. Neither ship did give way, but trials then kept us at bay. We made it just our way through, so now the rest is up to you. It's up to me, it's up to you. Do unto as you would have them do. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I didn't know when we set sail in '58 we'd all end up in jail. I've been called worse than fool for sailing on the Phoenix and on the Golden Rule. It's up to me, it's up to you. Do unto as you would have them do. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yay!
Everybody was kind of crying when they heard that as the Golden Rule was being launched after 5 years of rebuild into the waters of Northern California. It was amazing. And we had hundreds of people there. It was a big community effort when we rebuilt the Golden Rule. And Jerry and I only showed up at the very end and learned about all of this. Wow. I got involved because I like to, sand and paint and varnish and things, and they needed to finish the Golden Rule. So we were living in an RV and we showed up in the boatyard. And we're still doing stuff for the Golden Rule. Kind of captured us. And the whole project captured Bigelow, the first captain of the Golden Rule. He thought long and hard about whether or not he really wanted to do this. It's dangerous to sail this small small boat to the Marshall Islands without, and they didn't have modern equipment. And the first time they went out, they got stuck in a gale, and they broke part of one of the sailing booms. And one of their crewmen was so sick that he was seasick for days and really could have died. The Coast Guard tried twice to talk him off of that boat. He was one of the last surviving members of the original crew, David Gale. At any rate, it was a big thing to think about doing this, risking their lives. And so in the book that Bigelow wrote the year after the Golden Rule sailed towards the Marshall Islands, he put down some of his thoughts of the time. He said, "I am going because, as Shakespeare said, action is eloquence. Without some such direct action, ordinary citizens lack the power any longer to be seen or heard by their government. I am going because it is time to do something about peace, not just talk about peace. I'm going because, like all men, in my heart, I know that all nuclear explosions are monstrous, evil, unworthy of human beings. I am going because war is no longer a futile jousting match. It is an unthinkable catastrophe for all men. I am going because it is now the little children, and most of all, the as yet unborn, who are the frontline troops. It is my duty to stand between them and this horrible danger. I am going because it is cowardly and degrading for me to stand by any longer, to consent, and thus to collaborate in atrocities. I am going because I cannot say that the end justifies the means. A Quaker, William Penn, said, "A good end cannot sanctify evil means, nor must we ever do evil that good may come of it." A communist, Milovan Giles, says, "As soon as means which would ensure an end are shown to be evil, the end will show itself as unrealizable." I am going because, as Gandhi said, God sits in the man opposite me. Therefore, to injure him is to injure God himself. I'm going to witness the deep inward truth we all know. Force can subdue, but love gains. I am going because, however mistaken, unrighteous, and unrepentant governments may seem, I still believe all men are really good at heart, and that my act will speak to them. I'm going in the hope of helping change the hearts and minds of men in government. If necessary, I am willing to give my life to help change a policy of fear, force, and destruction to one of trust, kindness, and help. I am going in order to say, quit this waste, this arms race. Turn instead to a disarmament race. Stop competing for evil. Compete for good. I am going because I have to, if I am to call myself a human being. When you see something horrible happening, your instinct is to do something about it. You can freeze in fearful apathy, or you can even talk yourself into saying, it isn't horrible. I can't do that. I have to act. This is too horrible. We know it. Let's all act. So as I said, he thought really deeply about this voyage before he took off, and this was part of what he wrote as his thinking when he wrote his book. So we have people in this room that are very dedicated to peace and nuclear disarmament, and I would like to introduce you to and have them come up, our crew. Captain Kiko Johnston Kitazawa first helped us when we were in Hawaii by finding us a crew to go from the big island of Hawaii to Maui. And although he couldn't go himself, he found us an excellent group of people, one of whom is going to sail with us to Cuba. And he helped us sail back from Kauai to Oahu, and then all around the island of Oahu, and when Kiko brought us from Hawaii back to California with a team of 3 other people. We also have Steve Buck, who's been our skipper a few times in the past and even recently, and is a wonderful sailor and organizer and has been really getting this boat shipshape so that when he's gone, everything is going to work really well and be very organized and easy to find. And then Marianne Vancouver came to us because she was attending a powwow up in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, and found out about the Golden Rule from Kiko. And she's been crew with us pretty much steadily just about ever since. So if you guys would come introduce yourselves and why do you like this project, and say a few words, and then we'll just have a discussion of maybe the nuclear cost review or whatever people would like to talk about.
Yeah.
Let's hear it for the crew of the Golden Rule. I have to wake them up to get them up here, that would be
Yeah.
fair.
It's been a long day, huh?
These are long days. Long days, but we're happy to be here in Florida, and we're happy to be here in Florida. We started in Minneapolis, St. Paul on September 26th, and steadily making progress, getting a start for the Great Loop for other folks who will follow behind us and continue the mission of the Golden Rule.
I'm Marianne Vancouver, retired librarian and long-term social justice advocate, but I walk the Mississippi River with my dogs and my friends every week, and it's been a long dream for me to travel by boat down the river. But the Veterans for Peace have a lot of integrity in their social justice work, and I've always admired the group. When I saw the boat was sailing, I thought, this is a wonderful way to get people to talk about the nuclear issue. We don't think about nuclear arms. It's back in the back of our brains going, oh, I hope nothing bad happens. But that's as far as it goes. But when you bring out this beautiful boat, and people are drawn to the wood and the water, and people who wouldn't normally talk about issues will talk about how sad it was that people suffered with nuclear testing. And they'll be willing to have a small conversation about, where are we now? Do we really need to have nuclear arms? Do we really need to have the leftovers of nuclear weapons production? They'll have a short conversation, and it's my hope that that's how we start to get more focus and attention. Our communities can't be safe with the amount of nuclear residue that's left in our communities after the production of nuclear weapons. So it's my privilege. Thank you for letting me be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha. I would like to acknowledge my crew. They're really great. What Helen said just begins to scratch the surface. Our mate is, you may find this ironic, but our mate is a former nuclear power operator. And thank you for your service in keeping that safe while you were in that field. But it transfers to keeping our boat running. Our systems are much simpler than what he's used to working with, but they're still complex for many of us. And he keeps everything going really well, and I really appreciate him. And Mary Vancouver is very knowledgeable, and she's very careful and deliberate. She doesn't leave unexamined premises lying around to trip over.
Thank you very much.
I have some people since I was 14 years old who've been inspiring me to work for peace. So some famous quotes are, nothing is more cruel than war, nothing more wasteful, and nothing is more beneficial than peace. And another one is, peace is not merely the absence of war, it's when people truly love and support and protect each other and work together. from a young age. They were sailing and boat building. So when you're thinking, what can I do to help create a peaceful world? You know, nuclear weapons are just the worst of the worst. You know, war is bad enough. Some people say, well, nuclear weapons aren't that bad because you could firebomb Dresden or Tokyo or level London without nuclear weapons, and that wasn't any better for all the people who got incinerated or crushed. But nuclear weapons are the worst and most egregious example because they're from the beginning, they're aimed at threatening and terrorizing civilian populations. And if you're making a dramatic statement, you need dramatic music. Cue the Ride of the Valkyries. No. So nuclear weapons have this, and all of the countries that have nuclear weapons have this in the back of their minds, that this is either something to threaten other countries with and make them do what we want. And when I say we, I'm speaking as if I was each of those countries. Or maybe a smaller nuclear country is like, this is our suicide pill. If someone's going to do that to us, we'll take them down with us. So this is not a healthy way to live. It would be like smiling across the dining table while you have your foot ready to kick the other person under the table. I would like to expose the fallacy of this way of thinking and get people to question that. So usually you think, how can I do something about that? You think, well, maybe I need to be a diplomat and go to Geneva or the United Nations in New York, or maybe I need to be a nuclear physicist. Maybe I need to be near the centers of power in big countries. Maybe I'm just a Hawaiian canoe builder in a remote rural area of Hawaii. What can I do? And then the boat comes sailing in and says, do you know anybody who wants to crew or sail on this? And I go, this could be a good fit. So thank you for that opportunity, and I hope I'm representing the Golden Rule and her goals well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thanks everybody for being here. And several of you were with us yesterday when we saw the film, Making Waves, the rebirth of the Golden Rule. So, and that, and several of you didn't get to see that. So I think it was mentioned earlier that you can go to our website, bfpgoldenrule.org, and download that or watch it just from the website. I guess you can do that as well. There's a 25-minute version and a 10-minute version. It's quite compelling. Actually won an award at the Guam International Human Rights Film Festival for the best short documentary. So I recommend that. I think everybody has spoken really well here tonight. We covered a lot of bases pretty eloquently. So I really don't have too much to add. And I think probably we don't have to stay here all night either. You know, we could be headed home shortly, which would be nice. I guess the only thing I'll say is some people might be wondering, okay, I kind of get it. I kind of get what BFP and the Golden Rule are up to and why they're sailing this boat. That's clear. But why the heck are you going to Cuba? What's that to do with all this? So let's say a few words about that. And well, you all know in this room that in 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we almost had a nuclear war.
Yes, we did.
It was through a very, very tense, difficult situation through that negotiations that took place between President Kennedy and President, I don't know if his title was President Khrushchev of the Soviet Union. that they were able to back out of this deal, make some compromises, and avoid a very, very scary situation. And many people feel that we're actually facing a similar dangerous situation right now with the confrontation between the two primary nuclear superpowers, the U.S. and Russia, in Ukraine at the moment. And that it's going to take negotiation to back out of that very dangerous confrontation. It definitely raise the risk of nuclear war. And I'm glad to see that President Biden is at least starting to use the word negotiation and saying that there are some circumstances which he'd be willing to talk with President Putin about. So I think it's important for all of us to encourage ceasefire and negotiation to end that terrible war before it becomes even more terrible. And the other thing, we're also concerned about Cuba. For many years, Veterans for Peace has had a position calling on the U.S. government to end its economic blockade of Cuba, which has also been in place for 60 years, pretty much since the Cuban Missile Crisis. So that's really has kept Cuba from being able to develop into a vibrant, self-sufficient economy, and it's designed to make people suffer. And in that regard, it has succeeded. And actually, right now, Cuba is in a very difficult situation economically, and people are suffering, and people are not eating that well. And on top of that, they just had a terrible hurricane. That was I guess it was Ian that came here also. But in Cuba, it destroyed thousands of homes in Pinar del Rio province in the western part of the country. So some of the Cuba peace and solidarity groups in the U.S. who've been calling for an end to the Cuban blockade for many years are now saying, well, at least temporarily suspended so that they can easily get the materials they need to rebuild after this terrible hurricane. So that'll be kind of the dual message, because really it was that intolerant and mean-spirited policy towards Cuba in the first place that created that situation where we almost had a nuclear war. So it's about time to end a similar situation in Ukraine and to end the U.S. blockade of Cuba. So that'll be the message that we carry with us to Cuba. And I'm sure we'll learn a lot and have a lot to say when we come back. So we're pretty excited about that. And having said that, I would just say, do people have any questions or comments of their own that they want to share tonight? Paula?
Yeah, I have a question, and it is, you mentioned like getting your city council to pass a resolution, or getting your mayor to join Mayors for Peace. And I wondered if on your website you have an outline for that sort of resolution for a city council, that kind of thing, or not?
We do, indeed. On the resources page is a link to some examples of petitions to welcome the Golden Rule and petitions, resolutions calling for Congress to pass the treaty, to ratify the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons and other things like that. And it's been really cool because in some of the places where we've gone, people have actually taken this information and gotten these resolutions passed. Honolulu, the city and county of Honolulu did, which was really great. I was able to attend that city council meeting where they voted to pass that resolution in favor of the back from the brink measures and the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. It was wonderful.
Yeah, so there are two parallel efforts that are going on, among others, no doubt, but two prominent efforts right now. One is an international campaign to promote the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which passed a couple years ago, 2017, I think it was in June.
It was July 7th.
122 to 1 in the General Assembly of the United Nations. and since then has gathered a lot of endorsements. It's been ratified by, I think, 80-some countries at this point. in
It's
time.
got 91 signatories, I believe. it is.
And of course, it basically outlaws the possession of, the use of, the development of, the transportation of, sharing of, threatening to use all aspects of nuclear weapons. That is for those, it becomes illegal for those who sign the treaty. But none of the nuclear powers have yet signed it, so we have a lot of work to do on that. And so ICANN, the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, actually received the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts to promote this treaty. And they now have a campaign going. If you go to their website, ICANW.org, ICANW.org, they have a cities campaign, they call it, I believe, where they have sample resolutions that you can have. And then there's a parallel campaign by Back from the Brink. I think we have some literature on our table about that from the Back from the Brink campaign. And the Back from the Brink group supports the treaty, and they also want to see the total elimination of nuclear weapons, but they are also promoting a number of more immediate measures to step back from the brink, such as declaring no first use policy, such as taking nuclear weapons off air trigger alert, taking away the president's sole authority to launch a nuclear weapon strike on his own, and other such measures. And they also have a cities campaign based on getting cities. And these campaigns have been pretty successful. I mean, there's actually 5 states, including California. I think the whole West Coast
I think so.
is among those states that have signed, and Los Angeles and a number of other major cities have done so. And so, yeah, there are resolutions that you can work with by going to those 2 places. And we also have access to those through the VFP Golden Rule webpage.
Yes,
And if
through on
necessary,
our
we'll make
resources.
them more prominent and easy to find. Thanks for the question. And I think that you can, in some cases, I think unions and universities and churches can also, I mean, it'd be nice to get the city of Pensacola to pass such a resolution, but in the meantime, the local church here can pass it. It's a very powerful educational tool. Hi, Bill. What's up?
I was just gonna, I mean, I'm really happy that you're going to Cuba. I'll tell you, it's kind of funny. Let's see, I started at Georgia Tech in 1953, and that was about the time when Fidel Castro was up in the mountains,
Right.
and Juan Bautista was the dictator
Right.
there. And about all the guys I knew were so in favor of Fidel. Turned out that his economy didn't work as well as they would have liked it to. But I also learned that that was because the U.S. was busy keeping hold of most of the land in Cuba. And if this is not directly related to nuclear weapons, it turned out more to be that way, but the way our foreign policy has been so oriented toward communism, anything socialist, has warped the relations between the nuclear powers.
Yeah, that's true.
I will also mention, I was in Spain at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I was reading about that in the New York Herald Tribune. It's not published anymore, but it was a pretty damn good newspaper. And you could buy it all over Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do that.
I was in Spain with a girlfriend, and I was ready to hunt up the nearest American unit. I just signed out of my the unit where I served, so I was a civilian. I was ready to walk back to an American unit and sign up and go back.
So for what, you'd go back because what motivated you at the time?
What is it?
What motivated you to want to go back?
What made me want to go back?
Yeah.
Because I'd grown up in a military family, and I'd just been in the Army, and I wasn't quite finished with that brainwashing.
Oh, okay. Right. Good. Because it's a familiar place too. There's security there. You kind of know what your identity is. Yeah. So, did you have something? Sure.
I do, I'm Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
Louder.
You can hear me.
Yeah.
You're the only one who can't hear me. Anyway, I don't mean to bring the elephant in the room, but this is a very Republican state.
Yeah.
And I don't see
Especially now.
nuclear weapons removal
Mm-hmm.
as a very Republican thing.
As a what?
A very Republican thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can't even get rid of guns, no less nuclear
Yeah.
weapons.
Right.
So I hear you, and you and I are the only ones in the room right now that aren't part of this. Maybe there's a couple more. But the reality is, how do we affect it when we live in a state like this?
Mm-hmm.
This isn't a swing state, it's a Republican
It
state.
used to be swing state.
Well, it isn't anymore.
Yeah.
That's,
Well, it's an educational process is what's important, and that's what we're doing. It's a long hill to climb we have, but certainly nuclear weapons is not really a partisan issue. Is that what you're going to say, Peter?
May I?
Yeah, please.
We just came from Minnesota, and I'm from Hawaii, so, I'm kind of new around here, and I don't claim to understand how everything works, but.
well, I just moved here from overseas in 2017, so
Okay.
I agree with you.
So what we had in Minnesota is a guy from Veterans for Peace the guy's totally courageous. He went to every town and village in Minnesota. He didn't care if they said it's a red village or a blue village or they're Trump supporters or they're Biden supporters or they're socialist. He didn't care. He went everywhere with a petition. And he said people signed it all over the place. So you might be surprised to find that people think nuclear weapons are not a good idea.
On both sides.
Yeah. And so part of our trip now, I mean, look where we are. We didn't say, oh, well, let's not go there. They're not going to want to hear
No,
this.
I just need to know if I'm
So
going to do this.
the only thing I've got to say is don't assume that somebody will not hear your message. There might be people who are God and country and military people who think nuclear weapons are stupid because you can't use them. You know?
It might be difficult to get a resolution against nuclear weapons passed in a local government here.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't mean it wouldn't be worth putting forward because you can have a discussion about it. It's the basis for discussion and education. Bill, you got more to say?
In the middle of the Vietnam, I can do more. War's all mixed up. I'm sorry, the Iraq War. There was a group that gathered every Friday noon, and most of us know who they were. And we held signs up and people would honk. They went like this, some of them went like this, some of them used a finger, some of them. So I started counting how many favorable responses we got, and there were several times favorable responses from motorists. Then there were several times more favorable responses than there were hostile. Amen. And I've used that often to say, you know, maybe it's not quite as Republican, but maybe the people that are not Republicans are hesitant to stand up and talk and say what they think.
Could be.
And so maybe one of the things about this is not necessarily getting the politicians to change, and to get people to speak up.
Right, and have the information they need to speak up confidently. So I want to thank Scott for doing the tech work tonight. But I know you're the president of the local BFP chapter, and I wonder if you might want to say a few words to help us close out this evening. And in the meantime, Helen's actually passing a petition around. And what is that, Helen?
Well, I've got the petition that we've used in the past. I thought a couple people might like to have a copy of it. You can collect signatures, and just collecting signatures puts it in people's minds. But if you can then send it on to your representatives, that would be cool. So if anybody would like to sign this petition, I'll send it around, and I will when we leave, I'll take a copy of it and say, hey, some of your constituents don't want to have nuclear weapons.
All right.
Bill had asked me to get a uniform, so, and I see he's not, so I thought he was Bill was an officer and I wasn't, so tells me what to do. So I just wanted to first thank y'all for coming down here. I know it's a big trip to be here, so we're very thankful that you're here, and also grateful to our Unitarian friends for coming out again and for helping out as well. So, you know, our Vets for Peace chapter has been around since 2003, 2004, and started because of the Iraq War. And, you know, we have we had the war as one of our big impetus for being able to start, and it was a lot easier to recruit people and to get things going when there was an action item. Well, of course, you know, the action item for things like this, you know, might be too horrific to get people out and protest if there's a mushroom cloud behind you. So, you know, some of the things that that we could do over here is to be thinking about that kind of stuff ahead of time. And this is something that I blame myself for a lot, because I don't think about this until the days come up. But it's something that we could be thinking about ahead of time. Every August 6th and August 9th are the anniversaries of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And with those anniversaries, that they have a lot of incredible symbolism that we could always tap into. And yeah, I remember when I was, I guess maybe about 13 years old, my aunts were members of Catholic Worker, and one of the, in fact, the first protest that I went to was an anti-nuke protest, and I didn't care, but I was about 13, so I didn't really know. I just was dragged along, you know, for more bodies to be at the protest. But you know, they planted seeds in my head, and the first one was we made these little lanterns that we put on the water. And this was, it was a powerful scene, in my 13-year-old memory. And we did these constant protests with them. And I say we, I literally been dragged out there. But they protested the nuclear ships that would come into the port of Corpus Christi. And as far as Corpus Christi, they protested the nuclear submarine that was named the city of Corpus Christi, which is the body of Christ. And, the Catholic workers, so they saw the symbolism in that being very ironic. So they would do this quite a bit, but they would always use those moments to be able to galvanize support. And even though it was during the 80s and where there was that constant fear back then of the nuclear bombing over our head, it's important for all of us to remember that those bombs are still there. There's more countries now with the bombs, and every once in a while it gets much, much closer. And even outside of conflicts during the 90s with Clinton, there was a number of really, really close instances that almost started nuclear, or at least not wars, but at least started bombs dropping, one way or another. So they were always pretty close to that, no matter what the regime in power is, or whether it's red or blue. I think it's safe to say that everybody is opposed to a nuclear war. I don't think too many people would be in favor of one. It's just the politics that keep us from pushing it further. I think whatever we can do to make these nonpartisan issues, that would be beneficial to us, because a nuclear bomb is not going to discriminate between Trump supporters and Biden supporters, or Green Party, or any other parties. They're just going to kill us all. So as a Vets for Peace, I wanted to thank our Vets for Peace for coming out, Vets for Peace, the members, the associate members, and everyone else for being out here, and for all the people, Bill, who's been out here in the trenches for years, and everyone else who's supported us in all sorts of incredible peace movements and activism over the decades. So thank you very much, and love you all. And to take a nod from Captain Kiko, thank you for your service.
But you're talking about a different service.
Yes. Yes. Service for peace.
Now, we do have some T-shirts for sale in the back, and a donation jar, I think, and some interesting literature. I'd be happy to informally converse for a while longer. And thank you all again for being here. It's wonderful meeting you.
Yay. Thank you.